Hello there. Didn't think we'd see each other so soon. But yeah, this is another episode of Poly Side Eye. This is our post-election 2024 results. We have a winner, and that winner is Donald Trump. And for all intents and purposes, I'm going to try to maintain and just have an objective conversation with Jared because, I want to learn from Jared. So I'm going to hold my mule and I'm going to do a separate video on my Patreon where I can really say what I want without being demonetized. But thank you, Jared, for coming again. I appreciate you for coming twice in a week.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we said we'd do an episode whenever we had the results. I didn't think we would get them this soon unless this was the outcome. So, so I'll try to do what I typically do, which is I try to give people a political, historical reading of things. So if you want, this isn't going to be, I'm not going to give you catharsis. So like, if you want to feel good, that's not what I'm here for. What I try to do is give people a historical explanation for the way that I understand politics. And you can always feel free to disagree with me. It's just my interpretation. And hopefully that maybe clarifies things for people.
Right. Thank you for that disclaimer. We're going to give it to you straight. We're going to give you the facts. And yeah, we're going to keep the emotions at bay. That's mostly for me.
Yeah, that's for you. That's never an issue for me. So
because I want to curse so many motherfuckers out. Like I want to curse these skin people. Like I'm mad, but I'm numb right now. I saw the writings on the wall. Like I tweeted it like in August. I was like, I am not going to underestimate racism in this country and misogyny. And look, she didn't even get the popular vote. Like I can't even say like, at least half the country like voted on the right side. But what else happened? Like he got to 270. Well, let's talk about last night. Last night, I was just like, you know what? I'm optimistic. The board is always going to be red in the beginning. That's just how it usually is. But then, like, when I saw Georgia and North Carolina, I was just like, oh, Lord, here we go. And then, like, I thought Michigan was leaning blue. And then I'm seeing, like, Michigan, the blue wall basically is leaning red. Like when Pennsylvania was like 80% in, I was just like, I was getting nervous. So yeah, it looks like, because what's his name? Steve Kornacki or something? I watch him.
Yeah.
I love how he breaks down the counties and how he was like basically giving us the comparisons like to 2020, like where Biden did well, like she needed to do as well or better. And it looked like Trump's campaign was able to like snatch votes from every single county to where that actually made an effect. And then even in New York and New Jersey, he did like, he took more votes away in his favor. I mean, of course, Kamala won New York, but I was still surprised that like his votes went up from last year. So yeah, I wasn't shocked.
Well, let's just step back. Why are you shocked that he did better than he did in 2020?
No.
Why? Huh?
I'm not shocked.
Not okay. Yeah. So then, what led you to say you were shocked and then say you're not shocked? So I'm just curious. What about this is shocking?
Well, I don't think I'm shocked actually. Like I'm just disappointed. But you know what? I'm shocked at the popular vote. That's what I'm shocked by. I'm shocked by the popular.
The interesting thing with the popular vote. So I was looking at, this morning I was reading through a lot of different exit polls and just trying to get a sense of like what we know. Exit polls are, people read way too much into them. Like there's a lot of issues with exit polls dealing with like survey methodology and things I won't get into, but like that's really the best we have in terms of like trying to understand voting behavior, and not voting behavior, but trying to understand what led people to vote the way they did. But we don't survey everybody who votes. And so we actually don't have a way to empirically verify who people voted for. So there's a lot of assumptions here. There's a lot of stereotypes. There's a lot that goes into to doing this. But one thing that I thought was so fascinating was that Trump actually did better, no matter how you slice the demographics, age, race, even gender. He did better with slightly better with. It doesn't really matter because it's like a percentage point. But the point being, like, he did better with almost every demographic in the country, like no matter how you slice it, income, race, gender, ethnicity, region, urban versus rural, literally everything. So that tells me if he does better with literally every way that we like to slice and dice the country, he did better with every cross section, pretty much. That lets me know that there's something deeper going on with the way that we have organized our economy, the way that our politics are organized, the way that people understand what's going on. Like there's something clearly amiss. In what I think is really the problem, and I was actually talking to my mom about this earlier because she called me asking me to kind of console her. And so I told her essentially what I told you all. I was just like, I don't want to give people things. I don't want to tell people things that just sound good or like easy explanations, because I don't think there are any. I think we have to be very thoughtful about like thinking about what is our society. Like there's obviously something clearly amiss with our society. As I've long said, even before Joe Biden dropped out, I was like, the fact that the candidates that people are about to choose between are Joe Biden, who clearly has cognitive decline, and Donald Trump, enough said, should tell us a lot about our society. But nobody wants to take us the kind of the high level view and like ask that question. And so I'll ask two questions that I often ask of my students as well as myself. And I would suggest everybody ask these questions. They're very small, not small. They seem simple, but to me, they're huge questions and they reflect a lot about our society. The first is, what is freedom? And the second is, what is equality? Because I don't think any of us have any idea of like what we mean when we say these terms that are just thrown out left and right. And they're just signifiers, but we don't actually know what these terms mean. And the only way you can have a society is if that there is some like robust kind of discussion about what do we mean when we say things like we want to be free or we want equality. Like we have to have some way of doing that. But we're not going to get that through the media because, as I've said before, the media has a monetary imperative to make us hate each other because it drives revenue. So like we can't look to the media for that. We have to ask ourselves that. We have to ask our communities that, which is also a problem because our communities are splintering. One thing we don't talk enough about with COVID is the way that it has completely upended our social lives. We don't see our friends as much. We don't see our families as much. We aren't going to church if we did before. We don't go outside. I mean, there is bigger reasons for that. Outside has gotten really expensive in the last 4 years with inflation, but we are not social as like we used to be. And that has all sorts of implications for our politics because humans at their core are social animals. And when they are alienated, when they're isolated from one another, they get anxious. And anxiety is a terrible, terrible sentiment for any sort of politics. It lends itself really well to scapegoating. It lends itself really well to, supporting candidates like Donald Trump. And so I just think we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about like what's going on and not trying to find like these really easy solutions. And so I'll stop there because I do want to answer questions. And that was kind of a long soapbox.
Yeah. So everyone in the chat, maybe ask some questions. I'll try to like get to all of them. We'll continue talking and then I'll highlight them. Yeah, I mean, it's very real what you said. I remember that question that you asked. You asked me this question, what is freedom to me? And I really did have to think about it. Like, what is freedom to me? Like, freedom to me, I feel like, I'm going to be really perfectly honest. I think financial freedom, like, is freedom for me. Freedom to do, civil rights, that's freedom for me. So, I don't know, like, is that like a great...
The thing is, there's no right or wrong answer to this question. Everybody is going to have a different conception of freedom if they even think about the question. My point is, we don't even ask the question. We just take it for granted. I mean, Kamala's whole campaign thing was freedom. And every time I saw those that big ass sign on her stage, I'm always like, what does this mean? What are you trying to convey to people? Like, what does that? It just, I don't like the way we use, and we do the same with democracy. We do the same with equality. We do the, and people will say not just equality but equity, and I'm like, okay, that's the same. Like you're saying, we're just still using terms and just assuming that we have some collective agreement about what these things mean. Even the term America, like I'm always telling people, America isn't a thing; it's an idea, and like people have competing ideas of what that should be. That's where the politics come in. But like we take all of that for granted. And I'm like, as long as we take all of that for granted, it's going to be chaos because you can't have a politics where people can't talk to each other and people are alienated from each other and don't trust each other and fear the other. Like Toni Morrison always said, like one of the biggest issues with the way that we think about democracies is that there's always this kind of phantom other that we blame, which is always a racialized other. It's always Black people or immigrants, which we equate with being from Latin America. Like it's always an other that we're always pointing to. And I'm just like, we need to get past that and like be able to talk to each other. I don't know how we do that in a society where nobody trust each other and everybody is, just want to watch, stream anytime they have a day off, all they want. And I'm sympathetic to it because part of the reason people are so unwilling to be social is because we work so much. And so like we work so much, capitalism, as I've said before, it eats not only at our energy, it eats at our brains so we don't think, we don't have the time to think, we don't have the time to read, we don't have the time to do these things. But what I'm trying to convey to people is like, we have to be aware of all of this so we can like, before we react, we can actually like take a step back and say, wait, let me actually try to get a sense of what's going on, like, and not just reach for that simple answer, or not just reach, because anytime you reach for a simple answer to solve a complex situation, it's going to be a disaster. So let me get to answering questions because I can keep.
I appreciate you going over like just how did we get here as a country? Because look, I have zero faith right now in this country.
That's what I'm saying. Faith in it to do what? Like the faith in what is the what? Why? This is gonna be super existential, but why are we here? What are we trying to do as a human species? Like, what is the point of a good life to be able to get a job and shop and travel and hang out with your friends? I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but is that what we're fighting for? And if so, if that's what we're fighting for, the question then needs to be, well, what type of way of organizing the economy can accomplish those things? Because it won't be capitalism anymore, as I've said before. Like capitalism has exhausted what it can do in terms of providing that type of life. So if that's the case, we need to have bigger existential questions about what we think a good life is. And that's not even that's a human question. That's an existential question that philosophers have been trying to contend with for as much of recorded human history. Like, what does it mean to live a good life? And that can't be solved through politics. That can't be solved just by reading a book. Like you have to be social. We're social creatures, and that's something we have to collectively try to answer. Okay, I'm done.
I get that. I'm just saying, like, it's just what happened to human decency. It's just like,
but decency to do what? Like these are. I don't want to talk about abstractions. I don't want to talk about decency and like that's not interesting. We need to get nitty gritty. What do we mean when we say is it decent that both major parties are warmongers? Is that decent? Like, so I'm just saying, like, we got to be specific about what we mean when we just use these terms that sound good but don't mean anything.
Well, to be more specific, just someone who is a convicted felon, someone who has the track record that Donald Trump has, someone who has a track record of lying, compared to Kamala's resume. Like she's clearly like qualified for the job, but to still lose to someone like Donald Trump is the shock to some people.
So let's disaggregate that. So if it seems so obvious to you, why wasn't it obvious to 71 million people? And you can't just say, oh, because they're all just irredeemably racist. Like, I mean, you could, but that's a lazy, low-hanging fruit answer because everybody that voted for him was not white. And we could say, oh, well, Black people who voted for him are duped. I don't want to buy that either. So there has to be a sociological, historical answer for why that is.
we're a society of self-interest. Like people are really just gonna vote for themselves. Like I think people just really don't give a shit about like decency, like human rights, or what else? Like, abortion, like gay rights, trans rights. Like some people, it's just not important to some people. And I'm not saying like it's easy to say racist too, but I'm just saying like if you see the average Trump supporter and who supports him, I'm just not surprised sometimes. But for the other people that voted for him that are not racist, I would just say it's just self-interest or maybe ignorance. So.
Okay, so if that's the case, the options are people are going to either vote out of ignorance or self-interest. Then the answer should then be, well, what are they interested in? And is there a way to forge a politics around that? Now, some people can say, oh, people are just all 71 million people who voted for Trump are interested in just imposing rigid white supremacist country. Okay, if that's the case, then we can all just log off and it is what it is. Like we'll just have to be carried off to Gilead tomorrow if that's the case. I don't think it's that simple. I think that there are historical reasons for why somebody like Trump can be appealing to 71 million people. I think part of it comes from this commitment to a very specific idea of freedom that is really about just being able to buy a house, consume, and travel. We live in a consumer society. So like the idea is that people think that if they can't do those things, if they can't buy a house, if they can't consume at will, they can't like that they're falling short somehow. I think that's what most people probably think about. What I'm saying is we can't take for granted that people are going to be able to have those things. And neither of the candidates are going to be able to provide that, not because they don't want to, but because the form of economy that they both support can no longer provide those things. And so we, people who don't want to, continue down this path, have to work together in some form or fashion, create society, civil society, create society to make those demands heard. Like that's the only way. It's not going to be from the top down. It's always going to be from the bottom up. And I think as long as we keep thinking that this is something that a president can take care of, something that can be imposed from the top down, I think we're just going to keep getting disappointed. Like you have to have society. Like you have to be able to, as a society, fight for the type of society you want. But what I'm saying is we don't know what type of society we want because we never have that discussion. And it can't just be as simple as a society where people are treated with dignity, because that'll never happen under capitalism. Like that's one thing it will always require is exploitation. So like somebody's going to be exploited. It's going to be Black people, it's going to be immigrants, it's going to be poor people, it's somebody. So like that's not on the table. So the question should be, okay, well, how then do we create a society where that's not the only option that we have at our disposal? And that's what I'm trying to nudge people to like think about. I don't have the answers. If I had the answers, I probably wouldn't be here. So it's just like, that's something I want to talk with people to try to like develop answers together. But every time I try to raise these questions, it doesn't seem like people have an appetite to like engage them in any like meaningful way. It's actually really frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for going through that with me. Y'all, we will get to the chat, the questions. I'm going to do it now. We have 220 people in the room. That is crazy. It's crazy. But, people want to hear what Jared has to say because, you speak the logic and the truth. And you dropped so many gems in our last episode for the, before the election started. You could check that out because I'm sure some of his predictions came true. But yes.
So let me just respond to one comment because people are misreading what I'm saying. I'm not saying that there aren't racist people in America. I'm not saying that I will willingly concede that maybe most people in America are racist. Sure, I will grant that. But that's not the only part of the equation. And even if we could flash the Men in Black thing and get rid people of their racism, we still would have exploitation. So like that's not going to solve that problem. So as you were saying.
Okay, so if we could keep this brief as well, like the answers to the question, just so we could get,
I'll do my best.
Something else I want to talk about, ramifications of a Trump presidency. Let's see. What do you think about social media bubbles? From what I saw, I would have never expected this outcome.
social media bubbles are a real thing. I mean, that the point of social media is so you don't feel as like there is no universal world anymore. Like social media takes your data, they curate things for you to see, things that they know you're going to click on. So you're going to be presented with people who have similar opinions, or if their opinions are different, it's only going to be slightly, or they'll just drop something that's just so ridiculous to get you to engage with the comment. But you're not going to get a widespread kind of a wide kind of a broad swath of perspectives on social media, because the idea is to curate particular experiences, or to particulate a time, or to put together a timeline that's just things you want to see, essentially.
How much power does the presidency or Congress really have over prices of anything, really?
Not very much. A lot of, so honestly, like a lot of what goes on in the economy, which is a capitalist global economy, happens outside of what's going on in Congress. Now, they can do certain things like, raise taxes, which like, for instance, if the parties raise taxes on corporations can be like, well, we're not gonna pay that, so we'll just like raise the prices. So it could maybe indirectly, but a lot of the huge kind of global macroeconomic questions are not really is kind of beyond the control of Congress or the president.
How do we know what demographic voted for which candidate? I keep hearing the Latinx demo voted mostly for Trump. How do we know that?
So this is what I was kind of saying earlier. We don't really. So with exit polls, essentially what they do is they survey a certain number of people. It varies, 1,000, couple thousand, whatever. And essentially they do a cross section of people. So they'll be like, we want survey a certain number of Latinx men between the ages of 18 and 29 with incomes between 45 and 65,000, like all these different traits. And what they do is they say that, okay, can we assume that other Latinx men who have or share these similar traits, and they come up with all fancy kind of statistical weighting and stuff to give it like a veneer of like science, but it's all just like manipulation. Social science is not a science. I'm a social scientist and I can say this, it's not a science. It really should be called social studies. Is the more fitting term. But to answer your question, we really don't know that. People project and then make assumptions about it, which is also a problem, because we know those assumptions usually turn into stereotypes, and stereotypes lead to prejudices, et cetera, et cetera.
If Kamala wasn't chosen as the Dem nominee, what other viable option would have been better?
So in some ways, I kind of feel bad for Kamala in a sense, because she was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. So if Joe Biden would have, so I kept saying earlier this year, I'm like, okay, so people are just going to forget that the whole reason Joe Biden ran was so he could be a transitional figure, that he wasn't even going to pretend he was running for re-election. And that was just like not brought up until the debate performance. I'm just like, okay, but we knew this 4 years ago. So like, why didn't the media continue to talk about this? Anyway, I think the better option would have been for the Democrats to have a full-fledged primary going all the way back to like January and doing the whole thing. Because I do think the media won't talk about this, but I do think a lot of people didn't like the way that Kamala just got thrust into it without having to do the primary. I think a lot of people thought that reeked of hypocrisy, especially because you're running on this platform of democracy and you haven't been democratically kind of chosen. And so I'm not saying that it was her fault, because I mean, it was July when Joe Biden dropped down. By that point, it would have been too late and too expensive to have like a real kind of primary. And so I think choosing Kamala was probably the least worst option, but we knew she wasn't a good candidate either. Like, she's had a history of not running the best campaigns, and for other reasons, not necessarily doing that great kind of at the national level. And so like, and then she also had the added problem of she was painted. This is a really smart strategic decision on the part of Trump. His whole thing was like, we're going to paint Kamala as the incumbent candidate. And so it kind of cornered Kamala, because as being painted that way, she couldn't necessarily disavow Biden's record, because part of what she was essentially saying was like, I'm going to be another Biden term, but slightly different. But then she never really said how she was going to be different. If you looked at a lot of her platforms, it was pretty much, okay, do what Joe Biden was doing, but just do more of it. And like, that wasn't going to work. So I don't know how she could have gotten out of that conundrum, because, you know.
I mean, I saw that as, okay, so a felon can run for president, but you know, we have all these stipulations.
Okay, put that aside. Like, that's not, that's
just
that,
saying,
that doesn't matter in the context of like sure, we can talk about whether that should be the case, but he can. So like, we have to deal in reality. So the reality is he could run, and he painted her as the incumbent and was like, all right, so here's the deal. You didn't pay for eggs. Eggs weren't $10 for a dozen when I was president. Now they're $10 when Kamala's president. So which one is better? And she couldn't really be like, well, it wasn't really my fault because I didn't choose that, because she doesn't want to distance herself from Biden, because again, there is this kind of like, I can't really like say anything bad about Biden because I kind of wouldn't be here without him. But I'm trying to like show how I'm different, but I can't show I'm too different, because then if I'm like changing everything, it's gonna make it seem like Biden was bad, Democrats bad. So like, she was just kind of an imposter. I mean, Kamala, I have a lot of issues with Kamala that I won't bore people with, but I think given what she had, like in the time she had to like do anything of significance, the fact that she did as well as she did is actually pretty striking. And people forget, like Trump was up on Biden by like 20 percentage points in June. So like, the fact that she made that ground up is also like in some ways remarkable, but I think she did have a very clear ceiling.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think she got a fair deal. But anywho, thank you to Nuclear Pickle for the super chat. Is Project 2025 really a thing?
What do you mean by really a thing? Like, as in, does the document exist, or is this something that's going to be tried to be? They're actually going to like try to carry it out?
I would say the latter.
I mean, they'll probably try. Like a lot of the stuff in it, I mean, conservatives have been trying since like the 70s. So it's not like early 80s when kind of conservative think tanks kind of coalesced around Reagan. So a lot of these provisions they've been trying before. Some of them, like I've said before, are things that are kind of outside of the scope of what any state agency can do, because they're global questions. So, I mean, I guess you could like strong arm your way, which, I mean, in terms of like militarily, but I mean, sure, all the things could in theory happen, but like, will they is a open question.
Let's see. Why did the election have a positive impact on financial markets? What's the implication?
Well, I mean, Trump did. I mean, his tax cuts are a huge thing. So, like, he's pretty much said, like, the tax cuts are going to get renewed. So, like, the tax cuts will be, the business community was like, oh, great, we know we're getting our tax cuts. So, like, the markets are going to be fine. The thing is, like, the markets were going to be fine regardless of who won. Like, Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, which is a huge private equity firm, has like $14 trillion of assets under management, which is like almost half of US GDP. He was essentially like, I wish the media would stop acting like elections matter, because like they don't. Like, either candidate is going to give us what we want on Wall Street. So like, we're going to be good either way. So like, if people are interested in that, I can post a link. But like, they like, Wall Street knows like either both party is going to do whatever they say. So like, they were probably a little bit more excited about Trump because of the tax cuts.
Yeah. Hey, Jared, I agree that a book will not give us the answer. That said, what are some of the books that help give you the historical context to wrestle with the questions?
Oh, man, that's a huge question.
All these books behind you?
I know. I mean, I just kind of... so I would say one book that's really good I would recommend was called Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky, which pretty much talks about how the media after the First World War was constructed to be pretty much propaganda for the capitalist state. So what we call public relations now used to actually be called propaganda. But then after World War II and like the Nazis, they were like, well, we can't call like public relations propaganda because now it has like a negative connotation. So we'll just call it public relations. And so yeah, the government always understood like they had to propagandize the population, because if people actually knew what the US state and what in tandem with corporations and the military industrial if they knew what was going on, like people would be in the streets. And so they were like, well, we have to. In Walter Lippmann, he was a journalist in the mid 20th century, was early mid 20th century, was kind of the father of this kind of idea of like crafting public opinion. Like we have to tell the public what to think, because they don't have the capacity. They're too stupid to. This is another reason I get so annoyed when people blame working people. I'm like, and be like, oh, voters are dumb. I'm like, okay, well, y'all realize that idea of voters being dumb has a very long through line, especially dating all the way back to like really Reconstruction. So like after Reconstruction, like one of the arguments made against giving Black people the franchise or the right to vote was that they were just going to be shills for the Republican Party, especially in the South. And this was also an argument made about poor white people. So like there's always been this idea propagated by elites in like people who control the media, that people can't be told the truth because they're too stupid to handle it. And like that's why we have to propagandize them, because if they actually knew the truth, and they would vote accordingly. So like we got to tell them pretty much how to vote, and the way we tell them how to vote is by propagandizing them. And this all sounds really conspiratorial, but like just go read Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann. It's all spelled out there. You can read another book called Propaganda by Edward Bernays, who is the father of the public relations industry. And there's also a really good 4-part documentary series on you can find it on YouTube. It's called The Century of the Self. It was published by the BBC, the British Broadcasting Network. And essentially what that documentary showed was that public relations and propaganda was really the way to contain the population. And what corporations did with the propaganda was create the advertising industry to make people buy things that they didn't need. People forget that like mass consumption was always kind of viewed skeptically by most people until the public relations industry propagandized people to just how to desire things they didn't want. And they use Freudian theory, so like a lot of psychoanalytic theory, to learn how to tap into the human psyche. That's another reason I'm always telling people, like, you have to really be careful with television and ads and stuff, because they're designed to tap into your psyches, into your desires, and that gets really scary.
Yeah. Well, speaking of scary, this next segment, I just want to know what happens now. Because it just seems, okay, so we have a red House, we have a red Senate. I believe there's 3 Supreme Court justices seats, because I think there's 3 of them in their 70s. I feel like, what's that guy's name? Thomas, like he can retire now, and he'll probably replace him with someone our age. That's something to be scared about, like a fully conservative Supreme Court. What else? I guess immigration. I feel like, particular rights for like specific groups of people, trans people. Just like, what happens now? Like, because I feel like, there's not really nothing to look forward to.
That's why people need to start creating communities again, so they can learn with each other and think with each other, and like start thinking outside of this. But I would say, answer your question, legislatively, I don't think much will happen, because they don't have a filibuster proof majority. Now the Democrats will agree to some of the tax cuts. The Democrats like the tax cuts. Democrats were actually kind of worried that the tax cuts were going to have to come up if they had control, because Democrats can't admit that they want tax cuts, but they do want tax cuts. Maybe not to the degree that Republicans do, but they want tax cuts for corporations. Now, so I think that'll pass. There'll be some concessions. We won't get anything from it. It's gonna be tax cuts for wealthier people and people who have lots of assets and corporations. So that'll be a big thing, and that'll be a problem for us, because when they cut the taxes, that means the government will have bigger deficits, which means they're going to cut social programs. So like the way that they're going to pay for the tax cuts is by cutting back on education and education. But that was going to happen if Kamala won too. So like her campaign was already pretty much telling donors that she was going to cut as well. Like that was the thing with the Democrats. They pretty much agree on like the economy. Like there isn't really that much different, like the margins, but not really. Now on civil liberties like abortion and stuff, I don't think there'll be any like again, we've talked about this before, to amend the constitution, have a constitutional ban. You don't have the numbers to do that. So like what'll more likely happen is that you'll have some of these states that have passed some of these bans, many of which are unconstitutional, but they know that, who passed these bans, who people will try to, litigate at the state level, but Republicans have been stacking the courts. And so like a lot of the courts probably won't hear a lot of these cases. And so you will have a lot more suppression on that question, on the abortion question. Immigration, they'll probably build some form of wall. But again, Democrats were going to do that too. So like that wasn't really a difference. Again, immigration, Democrats have to talk out of both sides of their mouth, because they can't be like human rights, but we also need like cheap exploited labor. So they kind of like have to skirt around that. So like Democrats are probably glad that they don't have to deal with immigration, because Republicans can embrace it. They can be like, yeah, we're going to build a wall. Democrats want to build the wall, but they can't say it because human rights. So what else? What are the issues? Everything else, I feel like it's going to be more localized. So like as schools are cut and more school funding is cut, and is like spending on infrastructure is cut, like most of the fallout from that will be at the local level. So you'll have probably more crime, localized recessions. That means they'll probably have to cut the subway service, which means in New York fares will probably go up because, with the cuts. And so again, but this is going to happen under either party. So I would say on the domestic issues, the only real difference between the two, I think, is probably on the abortion question. Trump might be a little bit more. It depends who he appoints to like the attorney general. That'll answer a lot too. So
yeah, I just feel like it's just really concerning, because I just feel like he has no guardrails with like a completely red House and Senate. That's all. Like it just seems very scary. Do you have any silver linings for us? Like anything that's just hopeful? Like I guess we just have to do our parts and just like vote in the midterms, or like is there anything we can do?
I think people should create communities. I think they should find a way to reach out to people, just talk about, do what we're doing here. People need to, that's where people, I'm hopeful that people, hopefully a second Trump term. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I think you're going to have a lot of people who just fall into despair. But hopefully this can be also a moment where people say, we have to try something different. And I think really what we need more than now is like community again. I don't think we can underestimate how antisocial our society has become, and it's been accelerated because of COVID. And I don't think if we just all go to work and go home and that's the end of it, like we'll be probably back here in 4 years when JD Vance gets elected. So like we have to like, I mean, that's why Trump, the strategy, like he chose JD Vance because JD Vance was 39 or whatever, and like pretty much is going to carry his legacy. Whereas what did the Democrats do? They picked Joe Biden, who was like 80 years old, and then didn't hold him to account when he said that he was going to be a transitional figure. So now the Democrats have a complete gap in like vision, in leadership, etc. So that's why I don't want people to focus on them. Like the Democrats are hopeless. Like they are hopeless. If you put your faith in Democrats, you should be hopeless, because that's not the answer. The answer is going to be, we're going to have to, I know in a lot of places, people have created mutual aid societies. It's going to have to be more of that. People are going to, and I think that's really important. I don't think it's big enough, but like, I do think it's important in ways we can't underestimate, in that it creates solidarity. It creates a social world again. That's what we don't have a social world.
But can I be real though? Like, I just feel like people, like, I think you said this before, people want change, but like, you really got to do the work. Like, I feel like you really got to like step out of your financial comfort. Like you still got to maybe make real sacrifices, like be out there on the front lines. You can't just be on your phone, like on your computer, like virtue signaling, and then close your laptop and go about your day and go to brunch. Like you have to like really do the work. And I don't think people want to do that because I think, one, people are tired. Two, people are, just trying to make ends meet. And three, people are just lazy. They don't want to do all that. So I'm just wondering, like, I feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better.
It'll get worse for some people before it gets better. So this might be my hottest of hottest takes, but like, we do live in a class society. So like, everybody is not going to suffer equally.
Exactly.
If you are in the top, I don't know what people make in here, but if you are in like, if you have stuff in the stock market, if you have assets, you're going to be good, because our economy is structured to make sure that asset holders are good. So like, if you're white, black, whatever, if you have assets, if you have something to stop, you are going to be good. Like, people forget, like in 2008, 2009, when they had the bailout, what was it the bailout for? It was a bailout for asset holders. It was called Troubled Asset Relief Program. So like, if you have assets, you'll be good. Now, if you have to work for a wage, if that's your primary source of income, is selling your labor in exchange for a wage, it probably is not going to be much better for you. And that's why you especially need to be committed to, like, again, trying to build community and like social community, political community. That's the only way. Like, it's not going to have, there is no shortcut. History is a long-term project. It's not something that we should think about in 4 years, 10 years. So this is going to be generational. And if you have kids, you should be especially committed to this, because if you think it's bad for millennials, it's going to be even worse for Gen Z and whatever they call it, the generation after that. So like, if you have kids, you should really be focused on trying to figure out how to build community so that you can like build a better world for them, because the Republicans ain't going to do that. Democrats ain't going to do that. Like, it's going to have to be from the bottom up. And I do think that it seems like a tall task. And I know everyone wants like the to wave the wand, but like, that's just not the reality of it.
And I just feel like, Trump's presidency, like for 4 years, I mean, what he did in 2016, I mean, we're still suffering from things he did then. So I just can't only imagine what's ahead of us right now. So
who's the us? Because if you have assets,
right,
you're about to be in for a treat. If you have to sell your labor in exchange for a wage, especially if it's not a high wage, you're going to be, because I do also think the inflation is going to come back. I've been saying that for a while. Not as bad as it was a couple of years ago, but like, I do, because for reasons I've explained elsewhere. I just think that part of what's going on is like, it's not like, the thing is, like, it's not like people are in a dark room just like plotting to like destroy America. Like, it's not that. If it were that, like, that would actually make things a lot easier. It's that so many things are like intersecting to like create chaos. And there's no one thing that you can kind of like pinpoint. And so like, that's why it often feels so big. It just feels like everything is just always, but that's why I'm saying, like, you have to, you can only control what you can control. And something that you can control is to, again, try to find a way to be in community with people again. So we can learn how to be social creatures, because we're never going to change politics if we don't learn how to be social creatures again. And we've either forgotten that, we've lost it, for whatever has gone on, like, the way that our labor force is constructed, where a lot of us still work remotely, whatever the case is, we've lost how to be the art of being social. And it's also showing up in like our dating lives. We've done multiple episodes about that.
Yes.
And so I'm not just being like pie in the sky about this. I do think that political change really starts from the social. I think we think politics changes the social. I think what we do socially as social creatures changes what happens politically. And our social world is completely fucked up right now.
I agree. So I just want to pause right quick because, we probably have some new viewers in the room. And look, this is our 42nd episode. So if you want to hear like Jared's takes, because he's been saying this for a while. Like, how long have we been doing this show? I think since I was in my old place.
Yeah, almost. I think like 4 years. Almost, yeah, because we started like early in the pandemic. So almost 4 years.
Because you have been drilling in my head, the like capitalism is bad. Like, this is why we are in this position. So if you go to my playlist section, like I have all our episodes under poli-sci where you can, it started at like the 5 biggest scams in America. And, it was like healthcare, the education system, all that. Like, we talked about everything. So yeah, just letting y'all know that. I also want to say just the irony that the party that needs to do the soul searching is the Democratic Party and not the Republican Party. It's just crazy to me.
I mean, the Republican Party has had to do soul searching. Like, after Trump won in 2016, the Republican Party didn't want Trump. Like, they couldn't stop him. That's the thing. And so, like, now they're just like, well, this is what it is. And so, like, all of the Marco Rubios of the world, like, they didn't like Trump, but they knew that their brand of republicanism didn't work anymore. And so, like, they had to get information. And the Democrats don't have a figure like that. They don't have a figure that can propose a new kind of way of thinking about the world. Like, nobody, they all just kind of say the same thing. And like, that's why I'm like, it's like the Democrats need just an injection of something different. Like, it's the same shit we've been hearing since like Obama 08. Like, they just need a different, like, it's like that Miss Juicy meme where she's just like, can you come up with something else? Like, that's how I feel with the Republicans. I mean, with the Democrats. It's just like the same thing all over and over.
It sounds like, we need a Democratic version of Trump, basically. And I don't know what else going to happen at.
Well, I mean, I think in some ways the closest that came to that was when Bernie ran in 2016. You saw how Democrats dealt with him. And that's not to say that Bernie was perfect. No candidate is. But I do think that he was trying to reframe the debate. And I don't think people were ready for what Bernie had to say in 2016. Like, I think Bernie was 2 election cycles too soon, but now it's too late. Like, he's an also ran. But Democrats immediately circled the wagons around Hillary and was like, absolutely not. So like,
right.
So but nobody has stepped in to like offer a completely alternate vision of things.
I want to get to 2 questions right quick before we leave. I feel like this question is for people who have their passports ready. What do you think about all the Western countries going right, like France, UK, the US, and soon Canada? I didn't hear about Canada.
Such a great question. So, like, of all the Western countries, the West is in shambles. Europe is the UK is the worst. That's like the worst off. Germany is probably second. France is probably third. Canada is just whatever. No shade to any Canadian.
I'm right. I have a lot of Canadian viewers.
No shade. They just anyway. So I do think this is an important question because I think what it points to is like there's a bigger issue with like the West as an idea altogether. Its whole kind of idea of what freedom and equality means, I think it's a sham, and I think people know it, and that's why it annoys me when people don't put Trump in like geopolitical context. I'm like, oh yeah, but there's also figures like Trump popping up in Germany and France and the UK and like all these other places, and so like Trump is not unique in that way. Like this is there's a really good book about this by Wendy Brown called not Undoing the Demos. That was in the ruins of neoliberalism, and she tries to offer kind of a theoretical account of like right-wing kind of authoritarianism. But again, that's not unique to the United States. I think it represents the Europe and the United States and Canada are pretty much where capitalism is kind of going off the rails the quickest. And so I think we're seeing a lot of the same kind of politics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Simera, for your question. There's one directed to me about where is it? Okay. What are your thoughts about doing away with the electoral votes? I mean, we talked about this a lot. And I mean, it's just going to take a lot to do away with the electoral college. And I even feel like it didn't help us in this because it looked like she didn't even get the popular vote, which, look, I'm still shocked. But I think that was the only thing that shocked me last night was just like, I thought at the very least, she was going to get the popular vote. But it's like, what, 6 million now?
Yeah, he has almost 6 million votes in there. Yeah.
What's the college difference that you told
I
me?
think he's projected to do around, I think, 312 to like 220 something. So a pretty sizable margin.
Would you call it a landslide? Because I know we put that in the.
Yes, in this environment, yes. For somebody to win by, I mean, he pretty much did just slightly worse than Obama did in 2012, and Obama won pretty decisively. So by given the amount of polarization we've had over the last like couple decades, I definitely think this was a pretty close to as close to a landslide as you could expect. He won every swing state pretty much. So,
oh Lord.
but to answer your question, yeah, I don't like the electoral college, but I do think it's a low hanging fruit. Like, I think it's one of those things where people are like, "Oh, we just got rid of that. Like, that would solve a lot of the problems." And I'm like, I don't think so. But I don't like it. I think it's an illegitimate institution, but like, I don't think it's consequential enough of an institution to like focus your energy on that.
I'm not sure if you're going to remember what we were talking about earlier, but he asked, "Can you expand on what the chaos is?" Do you remember what you were talking about?
Yeah, so I was just saying, like, so many things kind of going on, like climate. We didn't even talk about climate. That never came up during the campaign. Climate, right. All of the wars in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe, kind of the tariff stuff, like all this stuff that just seems to be converging. They're all interconnected. Like you can't just focus on one thing. You have to look at you really do have to look at it as a system. People call it a system, but I actually don't think system is the right term. The word really should be as a network. That's the more like, to me, the more like sociologically appropriate term. It's like, it's a network of institutions and individuals and businesses and governments and all of these things, kind of each of them doing different things that have implications for the others. But like, we don't have a way of like kind of knowing until it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Oh man. I'm trying to see one more question and we will be on our way out. Well, I think this is funny. I wish Michelle would have ran. I'm just like, leave Michelle Obama alone. Like, she don't want to be dealing with this country. Hell, I don't. How does a Trump presidency affect what's happening in the Middle East?
Don't know. We'll have to find out. I mean, he hasn't really offered any, like, it depends a lot of this depends on who he appoints. Like, who does he appoint? We're gonna have a whole new, who does he appoint to be Secretary of State? Who does he appoint to be Secretary of Defense? Like, who is his national security advisor? Like, we don't know any of those things. And he hasn't really said, neither of them have said much. So we wouldn't have known even if Kamala won either. So like, remains to be seen.
Yeah. I guess this will be our last one. Can you clarify more on community?
I would say groups of people or individuals that you trust, that you can have uncomfortable conversations with without it inciting some degree of resentment towards them. People that you can think with, people that you can imagine with, people that you can, if you run into some form of issue, that you can maybe count on. Like, for instance, churches in a lot of ways were like institutions that served as like a focal point of community. We don't really have, people aren't going to churches. That's been one of the biggest impacts of COVID. Like, people don't generally go to church as much. That's been true across all denominations, races, age, all of it. Like, just a general kind of lack of spaces like that where people can be in community with each other. And if they perhaps can, cultivate some degree of like connection with people, like that can look all sorts of different ways. For some people that might be being in a labor union, depending where you are. Like, for some people that might be church, for some people that might be, and it's kind of hard because like, I'm a materialist. So I'm always thinking about the economy first. And like, that's just hard because like a lot of our work is so isolating. And so like, a lot of people don't really interact with people aside from like on a Zoom call, or if they do, it's very transactional. Like that's just my coworker or whatever. And I'm not saying you need to be best friends with your coworker, but like you do need some form of like space where you can engage with people in a non-transactional way. And we're losing those spaces. And so that's kind of what I mean by community.
All right. Well, we will end it there.
Wait, what was this point about he only offers concepts? What?
What part?
The last question.
Oh, he only offers concepts. Oh, I don't know.
What is that talking about?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I was curious. You're talking about I only offer concepts? Like I don't, yeah.
I'm not sure. But if y'all do have extra questions, you can put it in the comment section, and hopefully Jared will have time to answer it. I mean, I think you like, answering questions.
Yeah, feel free to. I'm always, if you hit me up on Twitter, like I'm always glad to, be a resource for people. I don't have all the answers, but I don't have most of the answers, but like to the extent that I can answer something, I'll do my best.
Oh, they're saying Trump said he has concepts of a plan. I forgot about that too.
Oh,
yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for talking to us.
Let me listen to this. Let me comment on this last point about.
Oh yeah.
I disagree about people working remote. No, like most people don't work remote. I think only about between last I checked, it was between like 20 and 30% of the population works remotely. But we have a large service sector, and if you've ever worked in the service sector, it's often very like fast-paced. Like people dehumanize you, customers often dehumanize you. So it's not a space that's often really conducive to like, sure, you might bond over like hating your job, but like it's not, you don't really have the space and time. Like I used to work at Hollister. That was actually my first job. Second job technically, but yeah, like you don't, pretty much the only way you could bond was over how much you hated your job. But like, it wasn't, again, you need a space. You need a space where you can interact with people on a human level, not just on a transactional level. And that's what I think we're missing. There isn't the kind of space for people to bond. And that spills over again, also into our love lives. Like people approach dating in this transactional mindset because we've been socialized to view every human relationship in terms of like a transaction, almost like a cost benefit analysis. And I'm saying like that is antithetical to community.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for clarifying. So yeah, if y'all want to follow Jared, that's his handle right there. Ooh, shit. Right there. Okay, right here. JC Tiger Fan on Twitter, especially because he has drops a lot of gems on there. Thank y'all for being with us. I mean, usually we have a classroom full of maybe 30 people, but I guess people like really wanted to hear your opinion on this very bleak outcome. And y'all like just continue to live your life. That's all you can do. Like, and just be cognizant. Hopefully you learn something. And yeah, I mean, I'm about to just breathe and smoke my blunt because like it's just today is a lot. I know we're all disappointed.
So let me just leave it a bit of levity. I promise you will not be awakened out of your sleep to be taken to the Handmaid's Tale land. Like that's not going to happen. I'm not saying that everything is going to be fine. I don't know that. I can't promise you that. But like as Chris said, you will wake up tomorrow. You probably will have to go to work. You will have to find something to eat for dinner. You will have to live. That's going to happen regardless. The question we should ask ourselves is, can we collectively figure out a way to live better? And I'll leave people with that.
Yes. And with that, y'all, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe and share. And we'll be back for another episode of Poli Side Eye.